your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Atheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Atheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined once again by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I don't have anything clever to say again. I'm the worst. No.
Oh my gosh, you fail so hard.
I can read you a cool fact from this book that I have right here in front of me.
No, it's fine. Let's just move on to the show.
Did you know that if you assessed yourself in the last chapter as a fawn subtype or as being on the right side of the fight to fawn spectrum, you may find this chapter relevant even if the fawn response is not your primary position?
Get out of my life. Good
That is
God.
a mind-blowing quote from Pete Walker from Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. Get your copy today.
I'll remember it for the rest of my life, Ari. Thank you for that. There is a perennial debate in the queer and trans community every June. June, as we know, is Pride Month. This month being especially significant because we are coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the Pulse Massacre, which I'm sure I do not have to go into details on. The phrase, "the first Pride was a riot," is not some hyperbolic SJW phrase designed for marketing purposes. It is a literal statement of fact. Pride commemorates the Stonewall riots that happened in 1969, and Pride celebrations today rarely make any mention of its history, and the celebration rarely reflects anything resembling its roots as an uprising against oppression and one of the first and most visible historical events where our community stood up against a government that hated them. And around this time of year, there are always debates about the way that we observe Pride today. Is it too corporate? Should it be a party at all? Have we lost what Pride is really supposed to be about? And this conflict really hits close to home for me as a person who cares very deeply about social justice and recognizing those who came before me and what they sacrificed for what progress we do have. And as someone who recognizes the monumental struggle that so many in our community still face, most especially queer and trans people of color who started the Stonewall riots, people with disabilities, and people in poverty. I also remember my first Pride fondly. I was there working with an organization set up to support those affected by sexual violence. I was out to precisely 3 people in my life at my first Pride, and seeing all of those people there who were living life publicly, it was a huge turning point for me. I saw people not just embracing who they are, but celebrating who they are. It was a big piece of letting me know that I would be okay to come out, that I could live a happy and fulfilled life as a trans person, and it'll always hold a special place in my heart because of that. If it were a protest march, I probably wouldn't have gone. I wasn't ready for that kind of thing. Ari, do you have any special thoughts or memories or anything about your first Pride?
I have only actually been to one Pride in my time as a queer person, which is my entire life. So the first and only Pride I've ever been to was the very first Little Rock Pride, which was in 2013. Yes, the first ever Little Rock Pride was in 2013. There's actually prides in years before that in a nearby city called Conway, which is where I went to college. And it was run by 2 very amazing gay activists who have now both since passed away, and they were amazing people. But Little Rock hadn't had its own Pride, and it's a much bigger city, of course, being the capital of Arkansas and the biggest city. And this was actually it wasn't in June, it was in October, because I think they wanted like the college kids from Conway to be able to come down and participate. So that worked out really well. And I was the secretary of the LGBTQ group at my school. So we took a group down there, and I'm looking at a picture that I have on my Facebook of me sitting in the back of the truck, and it was raining. So I've got an umbrella, and I'm wearing a shirt that I'm uncomfortable to wear now that says, "Ask me about my preferred pronouns," because I don't like that it says preferred. So that's why I don't wear it anymore. And I've got a little pink sticker on it that says Little Rock Pride. And Zach went with me, which was really fun. And it was pretty much just a march through downtown, holding signs, celebrating. There was a person in front of us riding in the back of a truck who was wearing a full bodysuit done out in rainbow. Like, it was like a knitted suit, and like it covered their whole head and their hands and feet and everything. It was amazing. But I was expecting there to be a lot of protest because, you know, this is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was the first ever Pride, so it made news. And I had seen, you know, comments on the news articles, although I made the mistake of reading the comments. I only did a few times. And, you know, there were comments like, comments like, why do you need to be proud to be gay if you didn't choose to be gay? This is sinful, and you don't need to be shoving your sexuality down our throats and all this stuff. But there weren't actually any protesters there, not that I remember anyway. There were some people who happened to be downtown who kind of gave us some stares. And then more than that, there were actually people who weren't in the march on the sidelines who cheered because they were just so happy that it was happening. And my friend Aaron was there, and he was up in full drag, and he got interviewed on the news, and it was awesome. So it was a good experience, and I was really happy that I was able to go to it because before that, there hadn't been one that I had been able to go to because, well, I mean, I was coming from, you know, a family where this stuff was not accepted, and I couldn't tell my mom that I was going to this. I was a college student, so I was able to go where I wanted, but I couldn't be like, hey, this is what I'm doing this weekend. I'm going to this Pride parade. So, but it was fun to be there with, you know, a bunch of people that I knew and people that I didn't know, and just march through the streets of Little Rock and say fuck you to all the bigots.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of memories like that, but you know, there is another side to the whole Pride thing. The Cincinnati Pride Planning Committee planned a pub crawl and didn't think that any of the buses should be handicap accessible. So a few people who use wheelchairs showed up and weren't able to participate. And there are constant debates over the inclusion of trans people in, placing trans issues at the forefront, since trans women, specifically trans women of color, started the whole thing in the first place. And so there are always these debates about the corporatization of Pride and, whether or not it's supposed to be a party, and there are debates surrounding respectability politics. And so, as a person who on one hand has a very fond memory of Pride and has thoroughly enjoyed the Pride celebrations I've been to, with some exceptions, I love it, right? I love Pride. But as a person who thinks we also should never whitewash history, and as a person who understands that there are many in our community still without the privilege to celebrate their existence, it does make me feel a little dirty. So that's the conversation this week. We've got a great panel lined up for the discussion this week. They are Trav Mamone of the By Any Means and By Skeptical podcast. Welcome, Trav.
Thank you.
Emily Karp of the Recovering from Religion podcast. Welcome, Emily.
Hi.
And Ethan Winters, who is a student at Georgia Southern University, friend of a friend we met through John Wosu, if you remember the episode that I talked with him on about activism. Welcome, Ethan.
Hi.
Get a podcast.
Yeah, you're the odd one out. So does anybody else on the panel have, memories, fond or otherwise, of their first Pride and sort of what your impression was of the whole thing?
Sure. I am a co-organizer of Asexuals of the Mid-Atlantic, and we went to the DC Pride Parade last year. My queer platonic partner decided he'd host it, even though he hadn't hosted any event for us, because he'd actually been to a gay pride, to various pride parades before, in Baltimore and in DC, and he knew a little bit about what to expect. We went as a viewing group because we didn't have, a good enough contingent to march yet. And there's still people in our group who really wish that asexuality would be represented in the march somewhere. And there were people that spotted that there was someone in the parade that did have a demisexual flag, and there was this and that. But we mainly just, really had a great time. We're doing it again this year. Everyone's really excited that it's becoming a tradition that we're going to at least view the Pride Parade. There's all the things that you said. There's all the complicated emotions about what Pride is and what, who can go and who can't go. There were people who wanted to come, but it's too hot for them. And for whatever reason, they can't be out in the heat if it's that extreme, or they can't, do that amount of sun because of their skin conditions or whatever it is. And, it is a very specific thing to be able to go to that kind of intense, loud, crowded outdoor event and be able to partake in that wonderful celebration. But it's really happy to be there. So, yeah, I have mixed feelings, but I really am looking forward to going again.
Trav or Ethan?
I love Pride. I think it is like one of my favorite times a year. It's usually every year I go to like Atlanta Pride. And my first year I went is when I first came to Georgia Southern, so like in 2014. And it was an experience because like I live in Georgia, so bear with me.
Right.
So, it's an experience to be down here by itself, but to be in a place like Atlanta, and there's so many like different cultures that are represented there, and different backgrounds and different sexualities, different genders that you don't usually like. I come from a really small town, so like I didn't know a lot of stuff coming into like growing up and stuff like that. So to be at Pride and to learn all this stuff and to interact with all these different people and just to see people be happy in themselves, where I come from a town where like people, like if you were like gay or anything that wasn't, you know, cis and straight, you were like outcasted. So to see people that were just like happy to be themselves, partying with other people that were happy to be themselves, really made me happy to be myself. And so to be surrounded by that was really cool. But also, so the first year that I went, I wasn't out as like Ethan. And so the second year I went, I had my trans flag and everything like that. And so I was feeling very prideful and really repping the tea and whatnot. And so I'm sitting there and we're like watching the parade and everything. And this guy like walks up to me and he's like half naked, like rainbow Speedo on, just like living life. And he's like, dude, what country's that flag from? And I'm like,
Oh my God.
what country?
Oh.
And I was just
Transylvania. Now get out of my face.
It's the trans flag. And he was just so like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that's what that was. And I was so baffled, like, how do you forget us? Like, without us, a lot of the advancements that, you know, the rest of the community has made wouldn't have happened. And so it's just like, it's a double-edged sword. Like, I'm really happy to be surrounded by other people who are like proud to be themselves and all that good stuff, but at the same time, that whole fact that there's not really that representation of trans people and that part of my identity is something that I'm just like, I don't understand why this is a thing. So
yeah, I had kind of a similar experience the second time I went to Pride, because like I said, the first time I wasn't out to more than 3 people in my life. So I was, you know, to everyone else, I was ostensibly this like fat, bearded, cis, straight guy, right? And the second year that I went, I was out and, you know, marching through the street in the parade. And I just like, I'm just so in my element and I feel like everybody's cheering for me. Right. Which is silly, you know, but it was just that euphoria of like, I've spent my entire life hiding and now I'm marching in a parade in front of tens of thousands of people and I'm not scared of who I am anymore. Like that was an amazing moment. But I also got sirred several times that day. and it's like, you know, I feel like we obviously don't want to go around assuming people's genders, but I feel like at a Pride event, even more so. Like, like the fact that someone is wearing a skirt doesn't necessarily mean that you know what their pronouns are. And it's, you know, it was just a lot of things sort of along those lines that it's like, wow, this is really amazing. And then, you know, those little reminders that kind of just sort of like, you know, jab you on the side. That's like, yeah, this is only kind of sort of about you. And I think that's kind of a broader reflection of how the movement kind of goes anyways, right? It seems to be led, at least publicly, by, you know, white, cis, gay men.
Right.
And you know, I read this article once that it was like, you know, there's like a very thin layer separating that group of people from being like on the same level of privilege as the rest of society. And obviously there's a lot to unpack there, and that's not really what this episode is about. But I see what they're saying in the representation. I mean, if you go, you know, to the Pride Planning Committee meeting in Cincinnati, where I'm from, that's very much on display. You know, I was as far as I know, I was the first trans person ever in the room there. And I didn't have time to do a lot of work. So, I mean, I was just kind of at the meeting a couple of times. I didn't even really have time to influence any of it. And so I definitely felt very much that, trans people were an afterthought. And, any sort of notion that this is about activism or that this is about accomplishing goals was absent, right? And it definitely ignited that conflict in me because, the first time I go to Pride, I have no idea. I don't know anything about queer history. I don't know anything about queer community politics. Like, I just know there are tens of thousands of people celebrating who they are. So that's my first experience, and that's what's in my head. But then I learn all this other stuff. So it's a conflict. And speaking of inclusion, Emily, when I posted on Facebook that I wanted to do this episode, you had responded specifically saying that you had some thoughts on the dynamic of asexual people in Pride. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's probably another one of the big ones, and probably is even less talked about than problems with trans inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the trans thing, and I completely felt it a little bit at the one Pride parade I've been to. There's LGBT, but people only know the L and the G. People only know the rainbow flag. No one knows what anything else looks like. No one remembers the rest of it. But there's also a Q plus at the end sometimes.
Right, there's like 7 more letters, guys. Come on.
Sometimes intersex people and asexual people and all the other things, non-binary people, things that people don't realize exist, even gay and lesbian people that are at pride parades don't realize exist, like asexuality. It's definitely not represented. I think the fact that we went as a group of asexuals to watch from the sidelines helped us feel a little bit more like this was our thing too, even if they don't know it yet, even if asexuality is invisible and unknown and has so much awareness to still be spread. We can sort of not just be there as allies, there's a little bit of that in there. And, most of us were wearing purple shirts, or white with purple on it or something. The flag is white, purple, gray, and black for asexuality. And this one guy walks by us and is like, "Are you all Ravens fans?" The football team in Baltimore. And we're like, and like, I'm like, "Actually, we're asexual." And he's like, "Oh, that's great." And he starts like hugging us. And some people are really like uncomfortable with hugging. And we're like, actually, some of us are a little touch averse too. I think you might want to keep the hugs to a minimum, because he's like trying to hug every person in our awesome Ravens, asexual, whatever group. That's awesome. And he's just like so happy and probably drunk and whatever, and he's having a good time, and he's completely oblivious to how memorably that moment is, as he doesn't know a thing about asexuality and isn't stopping to read our shirts that say things like, "I'm asexual, ask me how," or don't fuck with asexuals or whatever else,
like that.
There were all these good things that people had both, bought shirts that were made on artsy websites, or they had created themselves these shirts, just used marker on white t-shirts and whatever. Different people did different things. And yeah, I hope one day, the DC Pride Parade is so huge. I hope one day soon that asexuality can actually be a part of marching in it, the way, it's been in other Pride parades, the way it's been in some Pride parades for a decade, I think, or at least almost that long, but it's definitely not spreading across the whole country in the same speed. And even though we're a pretty liberal, pretty gay-friendly city, we don't have that kind of asexual community here yet, where enough people want to do that march and are physically able to and have the money to pay for it. I want to help organize marching, but I don't want to be the only person in the parade marching for asexuality. We need to have a group big enough that all can do it, and then we will do it.
Did you experience any hostility? Because I've heard that from other ace folks saying that, they show up to Pride and they're just handing out leaflets saying hey, asexuality is a thing too. And people act hostily, if that's a word.
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of people who are some flavor of gay, lesbian, bi, pan, who don't think that the T should be part of the group. I think there's probably an even higher number of people who don't think that asexual people should fall under the umbrella. Did you run into any of that?
I mean, to be fair, we weren't handing out the pamphlets, and we weren't being as awareness spreading as we could have been. So people didn't feel. I think a lot of, especially when asexuality was less well known, when the very first time you've ever heard of it, someone brings it up to you. A lot of times, if it's in a queer context, people think you're saying you should be celibate, that you're wrong to be sexual,
right.
That they completely mishear whatever you said, because as soon as you said the word asexual, that's what they heard. They didn't hear, we just don't experience sexual attraction ourselves. Have our own confusing non-straight experience that's different from yours, and we want to be recognized. We have nothing. We actually are, strong allies of the LGB type of sexualities. It's just we are different. But they're like, stop pushing your celibacy, religious, whatever on you. Like, but that didn't happen to us because we weren't really. Most people were really friendly. The guy that noticed the "Don't fuck with asexual" shirt on one of our members, he was in the parade marching, and we were watching. He stopped and went back to her shirt and was like, "Oh my God, that's the best thing," and then he kept marching. There was pretty positive, happy reactions overall, if anyone noticed at all. But I did feel a little invisible. I did still, even though I was wearing a purple shirt with ace on my back, with ace in the whole flag of squares or something, and we were waving an ace flag as well as a rainbow flag in our group. We had one of each. We still, I don't think a lot of people really read the word asexuality on enough of our things or knew what it meant. But you can't tell who did know. You can't tell who walked by and knew if they didn't tell you. So we don't really know. Yeah.
Here we are once again to shamelessly beg for your money. Our continuing fight to tear down polite society is not one we can undertake alone. We need your help. This month, we're using our Patreon money to lobby Congress to make roller derby the official sport of the United States. To find out more, head over to patreon.com/The Gay Peace Manifesto and consider a per-episode donation to support the show. Thanks, friends. And so, I mean, that kind of brings it to another thing that's really commonly associated with Pride, and that is the just outlandish, scantily clad people dancing on Pride floats, in their underwear,
grown men grinding up on children. It's disgusting.
Well, that escalated quickly.
Yeah, that went. Ari took that one over the top real fast. Thanks, Ari. And there's. I have to imagine that the focus on that has to be a little alienating for people who are asexual. And there is also, of course, the debate about whether or not that's the sort of image we want to project, right? And the concept that dances around is obviously respectability politics. How much do we have to tend to our public image to legitimize ourselves in the public eye? I tend to think that both are important, right? I think we need the queer and trans people in suits and ties being the respectable business people and respectable members of society. And then I think we need the people who are going to shock culture, right? Because I think that in one way or another lets us fit more into the societal fabric as yes, we are a diverse group of people. You know what? Some of us like dancing naked. Some of us like dressing modestly. Some of us like having lots of sex all the time. Some of us aren't so fond of sex at all, and that's all okay. So does anybody have any thoughts just sort of on that concept in general of this focus on Pride, of being a sort of an inherently and proudly sexual event?
Let's hear from Trav. They haven't said anything yet.
Right, yeah. Well, I let Ethan speak because I've actually never been to a Pride before. Mostly it's because it's always in the summer. Both the DC and the Baltimore one are always in the summer, and it's usually hot as balls outside, and I hate big crowds, and anyone who has driven through DC knows that if hell exists, it would be getting through DC traffic for all of eternity. Having said that, though, I do have a couple of things to say about what you're saying about respectability politics. Personally, I think do what you want to do. You know, if you want to have a G-string, do it. You know, if you don't want to, if you want to dress, you know, sort of business casual, do it. And I also have another thing about respectability politics that I've noticed, especially not just within Pride, but within the LGBTQ community in general. You know, we push this narrative of we're just like you, which sounds great on paper, but a lot of times it comes off as, you know, throwing polyamorous people under the bus, throwing people who are, you know, into kink under the bus, and sort of portraying like, you know, the good ones, quote unquote, are the ones that, you know, get married and have kids and all that good stuff. Which, don't get me wrong, you know, anyone who wants to get married should get married, and anyone who wants kids, you know, should have kids. But well, actually, I wanted to bring up someone who is very instrumental in getting Pride off the ground. Her name was Brenda Howard. And according to Wikipedia, it says here she was an American bisexual rights activist, sex-positive feminist, polyamorous, and BDSM practitioner. Howard was an important figure in the modern LGBT rights movement. She's known as the Mother of Pride for her work in coordinating a rally and then the Christopher Street Liberation Day March to commemorate the first anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Howard also originated the idea of a week-long series of events around Pride Day, which became the genesis of the annual LGBT Pride celebrations that are now held around the world every June. Additionally, Howard, along with fellow LGBT activists Stephen Donaldson and L. Craig Schoonmaker, are credited with popularizing the word Pride to describe the festivals. And it says here she was, you know, openly bisexual, she was polyamorous, she was involved in the kink community, and so whenever, like, I see, you know, sort of mainstream LGBT, you know, push this narrative, like, you know, people aren't going to take us seriously unless we sort of conform to, you know, heteronormative standards. I'm like, fuck you. Kinky, polyamorous, bisexual feminists have been part of the LGBTQ movement since day one. Don't you forget it.
Well, right. And I mean, again, let's remember trans women of color started Stonewall. Yes. And so, like, are largely responsible for the beginning of the rights movement as we know it anyways, right? So I think at the very least, it's important that we recognize, remember, and honor that fact. And so I think what that leads to for me is, have we lost what we think Pride should be? Should Pride be more activism focused, or is it okay that it's a celebration? Because, you know, the conflict for me is that I want to celebrate, right? I want to be happy. I want to be comfortable in my skin. I want to celebrate the vibrancy and diversity of my community, and I want to celebrate all of the amazing people that I know. But, you know, then I think about how many trans women of color were murdered this year, how many gay couples were denied adoptions this year, those kinds of things. And it's that sort of, I guess it becomes the activist dilemma, right? Like, if you're not constantly worrying and you're not constantly stressed out about everything that's wrong, you immediately feel guilty, right? Does anybody have thoughts on that dynamic of sort of activism versus celebration and pride, and if there's a balance to be had there?
I think that it's a bit of a natural evolution of where the LGBT community has come since Pride started. We mentioned earlier that the first ever Pride March was meant to commemorate the 1 year anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which of course was not a happy, clappy celebration. It was a riot of people fighting for their rights and their dignity. So, the first Pride marches weren't exactly parades. They were more of protests. They were more of we're here, we exist, and we're fighting. But as being open and being out, and our community has gotten more acceptance in the wider populace and through the legal system as well, I think it's morphed more into just kind of, people are kind of complacent. Especially we've talked about the problem with the Pride committees being generally headed by the cis gay white men. So, as far as the LGBT community goes, they're pretty much the most privileged ones. And so they're like, hey, life isn't that bad for us anymore. Of course, we still have our struggles and we still have ways to go, but things are pretty good. It's definitely not like it was back in the Stonewall days where, you would get busted just for being at a gay bar. So they're kind of using it as a, hey, let's show the world that, love is love, love wins, and we're just going to celebrate the diversity of people, and that everyone deserves rights and everyone deserves to be treated equally. And then those of us who are a little lower down on the privilege are like, yeah, that's cool. Like, I like that. That's fun. But then also we still have a lot of fighting left to do as well. So it's kind of, there's nothing wrong with it being a celebration. And I love the celebration. I think it's really important for us to get together and be a strong community and to show the people who are watching who may not necessarily be in favor of our community, we're just people, and we want to show you that we're not doing anything crazy. And even if we are doing anything crazy, we're allowed to be crazy. So, hey, but yeah, we've got to show the world that this community exists and that we're just humans like everyone else. But at the same time, I would like there to be more of a focus on activism, because I think it's leaning a little bit too much towards the celebration end. At least, the one that I've been to anyway was definitely just kind of march through the street with your sign and cheer and clap. There wasn't really any kind of activism focus at all, which I guess is understandable being in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's pretty much a form of activism just to show up to Pride in Little Rock, Arkansas, and just
Right.
just be visible and walk through downtown, with your community holding your sign or wearing your T-shirt or whatever it is that you're doing, even if you're not queer yourself, even if you're just an ally, just showing that you're there for that community. So I guess it really depends on the area of the country that you're in. The South is, even the queer community in the South is like 10 years behind the queer community of the rest of the country.
Ethan, we haven't heard from you in a minute. Any thoughts on this question of celebration versus activism?
For me personally, I feel like my identities in themselves is like a constant fight, like literally every day. It's like waking up and trying to get people to understand who I am, just so I get the basic respect that other people get just for breathing. So Pride kind of, I feel that activist dilemma because I really want the communities that I'm a part of, both my sexuality, romantic attraction, and gender. I want that to get somewhere, and I want more rights in that way, but also just having a day where I can just be me and I don't have to, I guess, fight so hard for that validation because I'm around people that, have more open minds. I won't say they're the most open-minded people, because even at Pride, there are a lot of people who don't know a lot of things, and that's, that's life. But, to come from somewhere that's like so closed-minded that like the idea of a trans person is not accepted or not recognized, and to have those moments to like march and just be seen and be proud and be myself are moments that I really treasure, because when I'm not at Pride, I do like this past year, I was the president of my university's GSA, And so every year we have Trans Week of Remembrance, which is, it ends on Trans Day of Remembrance. And so that's a really taxing thing, just to get an entire university to see not only me, but like trans people as a whole, and like humanize that experience, and like fighting for that. And then on top of that, like I do conferences and stuff like that and talk about like humanizing the different communities that I'm a part of, not only like being trans, but queer people in general. And then, you know, Black people in general and people of color. And so it always feels like a constant fight. So when I'm at Pride, it's like that moment to just let my hair down and just let loose. Like I can just get drunk at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and
right.
enjoy some half naked people and, you know, party. And, you know, sometimes, you know, somebody brings some herbal remedies to, you know, the party. So, you know, right. Turn up and whatnot.
Oh, you mean Chinese medicine? Yeah, that's really healthy.
No, Ari.
It's that moment to like be free for like 2 seconds and to like let that weight off my shoulders. So personally, for like, it's a double-edged sword, obviously, because of, you know, a lot of reasons. But at the same time, just to have that freedom and to like, to be there, just to know that not all of us made it to that point, you know, like the same people that were at Pride, not all of them make it to the next Pride, but to like, to be there and to still have that moment and to be able to experience that time, even if it's not completely perfect, it's something that I hold dear. But then I spend, you know, the other 365, you know, fighting for it to get better and get better. And so that's how I feel about it personally. Like and when you were talking about the whole respectability politics, I find it really crazy that, you know, when it comes to LGBT and queer people and the entire spectrum, people are like, oh, they're over there and they're like so overly sexualized and they want to be naked and all they want to do is, you know, be perverted and all this other stuff. But like, if like straight cis people do that, then it's totally fine, and it's called Girls Gone Wild. And
I was gonna say, yeah, it's called every pop concert, every pop music video, and like yeah,
like exactly, like that's totally fine and it's totally normal, and you know, it's boys being boys and kids being kids, and you know, it's growing up. But when it comes to, you know, queer people, all of a sudden it's, oh, they're so bad and they shouldn't be able to do that. And I feel like, why do we have to bend to the will of, you know, the majority sometimes? Like, I feel like it's really important that we have those times and those celebrations together to be able to just let loose and just be ourselves and not have to worry about all the, you know, the politics and everything else that's going wrong in the world. So I personally feel like, you know, those suits and ties and everything, those are great, but like, it's also really cool just to be able to like cut loose and just, you know, hang out and chill with your friends and have that connection with other people that may not be exactly like you, but you have those connections. And I feel like that's a really important event to have.
I see Pride as both a celebration and a call to arms. You know, some people, like Peter Boghossian, might say, you know, what's with LGBT Pride? Why be proud of something you didn't work to earn? Well, I don't know about you, but when I say I'm proud to be queer and trans, it's not because I think I'm better than cis straight people. It's because, you know, I'm proud I've survived for this long. It's my way of saying, you know, I know you don't want me to be happy, but fuck you, I choose to love myself. So if I ever get to a Pride March, that's the attitude I'm taking with me.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing for me too. It's, I mean, I'm not proud of that random circumstance of birth that made me queer and trans. Like, that would be silly, right? And nobody nobody really means it that way. Like it's the silliest straw man that people draw. What it's really about is the fact that so many of us have figured out ways to thrive and be happy in a society that largely does not welcome our existence. And the fact that so many of us have built lives for ourselves, and we can be happy, and we can be members of our communities, and we can do activism, or we can lead regular lives, or whatever we want to do. That's what it's about for me too. It's taking pride in the fact that I've sort of gotten past all of that stuff, and I've learned to be okay with me, and I put a lot of work into me, and a lot of work into becoming okay with who I am, and getting past all of the sort of baggage that you get hung with in society. So yeah, I think it's ridiculous, that whole argument.
And also, I just want to say real quick, well, two things. First of all, I'm so used to accepting table scraps that it's only been within like the past couple of years that I'm really starting to be okay with saying, no, I should get a seat at the table as well. And so that is, like I said, I've never been to a Pride event, but, LGBT activism and LGBT pride in general, that's what it means to me.
I wanted to add from the asexual perspective about the sexual stuff at Pride.
Please do, yeah.
I've seen a few different perspectives, and the biggest thing is most asexuals who think about it at all seem like they really get how much it's fighting back about, it's a reclaiming of what was denied to you, and it's saying, you know what, we don't have to be ashamed of this. And it's a really, it makes sense why it ended up being such a hypersexual situation, because they were, forced to be so closeted about sex, put in prison or executed in some places still today for the sex itself. That's the thing that's like so important, to be like, no, this is actually something that we, do and enjoy, and this is who we are, and we don't want to be ashamed. And for asexuality, it's sometimes you're like, what is there such a thing as asexual pride? Are we proud of nothing? What is going on? Especially, the majority of us who don't have sex. But it's the same idea. It's just in reverse. I think Julie Sandra Decker, who wrote The Invisible Orientation, like the textbook on asexuality, she's Swank Ivy on online.
I love her.
She wrote a post about Pride a couple months ago, and she's inspired by the fact that she's soon to become a 40-year-old virgin, and people still use that phrase so casually, as obviously no 40-year-old virgins exist. That's the most mockable thing in the world, and you have to be, there's this pressure to be sexual in a way that we don't want to be in a lot of ways. And being proud to be ace is, realizing, what, it's okay. I can embrace the truth, and I'm not ashamed of that part either. Like there's every side of it. And going to a pride parade, if you're asexual and sex repulsed or sex averse, is a decision that not everyone is going to be comfortable with. You're going to be exposed to mainly a celebration of cis gay people who love sex a lot. So if that's not how you want to celebrate asexual pride, that's understandable. And if you are uncomfortable with that kind of sexuality, and it's not exciting to see sexy people on floats, but marching by, and that's not something you're, in the mood to do, and we would understand. And I think it really depends on the person, how they're going to feel about these things, and how it's going to make them feel about themselves, and how they like, some people just really feel a strong allyship and are not going to be upset by any of that stuff, and other people, it'll just make them feel worse about themselves. So I don't know. I think the people that went to Pride with me last year loved it, and we had a different perspective on it than some of the people who might not have wanted to go, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I hear that. And It just boggles my mind that people have to make this so complicated. Why can't it literally just be as simple as, you know what? Sexuality is an important part of this community. Some of us love it. Some of us flaunt it. Some of us are really eager to celebrate it. And some of us aren't. And that's okay too. And those people are a part of the community too. Like, sexuality can be a very big and important part of this whole thing, but like, it's not really what it's all about anyways, right? So yeah, I mean, and you are right. I mean, that's part of, you know, this, something that I like about it is, you know, being trans, being a woman, all of those things, like, you constantly made to feel shame for your sexuality, and you know, Pride being a place that you don't have to feel that shame necessarily, and that you can sort of openly flaunt it, and you see you know, people of all shapes and sizes, of all colors, of all genders, of all orientations, you know, wearing basically no clothes and being sexy and all that. Like, I think that's a thing to celebrate. But I also do think it's sort of incumbent upon us to be mindful that that's not the entirety of what things are about. And I really don't think that's a hugely unreasonable thing to ask.
Yeah, and I also think that, like, you know, I went to Pride and, you know, we got female condoms thrown on us and they make it about sexuality. And I do think that the happiness and the celebration one day out of the year when you're doing your activism, 364 of the other days, like Trav said or whatever, or Ethan said that. But, you know, is really like a form of activism in and of itself. It's something to, you know, to let yourselves be happy. But it would be nice for a lot of people, especially trans and asexual people, and anyone for whom the sexual part of it isn't actually the real part of their queerness, like, that's not encompassing that, like, the whole thing, you know, anyone who is, you know, wants Pride to be a little bit more, I do understand that point of view.
Yeah, me too. So I think what this entire discussion kind of dances around is it a good thing that a movement goes sort of mainstream? Because I think at a point, in order to go mainstream, you have to dilute your message, right? Because if we had organizations who were doing nothing but, you know, doing the activist things and talking about, you know, talking about the people who are underserved in our community and the people who are the least privileged, none of these things would ever get any attention. Let's just be real. I guess the question that I'm getting at is, at what point is it okay to dilute the message, to gain a little bit of mainstream coverage, right? At what point do you put on a suit and tie instead of your Speedo to get on the news versus not get on the news? I hope this question's making sense. And is that a thing that's even desirable to do? Because I think what we've sort of sussed out in this conversation, at least among this panel, is that we're generally comfortable with Pride being a celebration of sorts, especially because I feel like everyone on the call here is an activisty person of one kind or another. So I think a lot of us spend a lot of time working in our own lives the rest of the year. So we kind of see Pride as a time to let loose, like we've talked about before. That's not necessarily true for a lot of people. A lot of times, you know, that's the only big queer or trans thing that they do during the year, or that's the only thing that they ever hear about on the news. So I don't know if there's a question in there, but, like, does anybody have
somebody just say something that sounds
right.
insightful and enlightening?
Yes, exactly.
I don't know. I guess there's time. I think there are times, like you were saying, Callie, there are times to just let loose, do what you like, and party. And then there are other times when you do have to sort of, you know, put the Speedo away and get serious. Let me put it this way. If we are protesting a, you know, really horrible bill to, you know, a bill that would take away LGBT rights, I really doubt that showing up in City Hall wearing a Speedo would really help the case. But, you know, as far as, you know, how diluted the message has to be in order to get mainstream acceptance, that's kind of like what I was saying earlier about respectability politics and, you know, pushing this agenda like, well, they'll give us rights if we're, quote unquote, one of the good ones. You know, we appeal to their values, you know, even if it means not being true to ourselves. And so I don't know, maybe it's a balance.
Well, and I suppose, I mean, the Pride celebrations do still look like the, scantily clad people dancing on floats and being hypersexual, right? And it's still on the news, and it still gets massive corporate sponsorships. So, I mean, maybe that hasn't been diluted at all, right? Maybe that hasn't been compromised, and it's just gained enough mainstream attention, enough people show up to these things that people are paying attention now. Maybe that's not even a thing that's really happening. I am not the most leftist person you'll ever meet, but I still get nervous when corporations get involved in almost anything. You know what I mean? And in fairness, at least in the very little experience that I had on the Pride Planning Committee in Cincinnati, I mean, basically it was just like, hey, we're going to give you X amount of money. How many places can we have our name up, right? I mean, they weren't trying to control what the event looked like, or we'll give you money if this, So, in my limited experience, maybe that's not even really a problem. Maybe that entire conversation was pointless. I don't know, but maybe it's just more speaking about the deeper question of how mainstream do we want to become, and are we willing to dilute the message to do that? And maybe that's not even a conversation that has anything to do with Pride. I don't know. Somebody save me here.
Somebody save Callie. She's drowning.
I personally feel like there's a time and place for everything. So I feel like there is that need for that whole corporate, like, mainstream thing. But I feel like when mainstream comes in and starts to, I feel like this is going to sound really hipster, but when mainstream comes in and becomes mainstream, then it's a problem. But when somebody, like, that's part of, like, mainstream, like, at Atlanta Pride, there's, like, a bunch of different corporations. So, like, the Coca-Cola factory is in Atlanta. So Coke's out there, Absolute Vodka's there, Johnson & Johnson's there, all these people who are, big corporations or whatever, and like those names, and they're like household names and stuff like that. But what I've noticed, and I don't know if it's like anything, well, I hope it has something to do with the planning committee for Atlanta Pride, they're not there necessarily pushing their own agenda. Like Nike's there too, but they make specific stuff for Pride, but it has their name on it. So I feel like that kind of gives it I don't want to say validation, but validation in like mainstream. Like you see a rainbow Nike shirt and like it's Nike. So you're going to be like, oh, okay, Nike's into it. So yeah, totally. That's fine.
Right. They're not just cool. they're not just throwing product out. They actually said, "Hey, we're going to do a thing specifically for this event because this is something that means something to us." Or at least that seems to be the message they're trying to send. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. Like the Absolute Vodka, they have the different labels that make up the rainbow, so they've got all that out there. And like Johnson & Johnson, they're literally giving out like full size like products to people. Like, I don't know about y'all. I'm a college kid. So like, money is I'm broke.
Yeah.
So
face stuff.
They're like giving out full things of Listerine and lotion, and I'm like, yes, please keep.
Yeah.
And so it's just like to have those labels, and then you go home and you're like, oh, Johnson & Johnson was there, like they're supporting, and Coke was there. They only had Diet Coke, but okay, they're there. And vodka's there and stuff like that, and all these different things that are they're big labels out in like I don't want to say the real world, but out there outside of Pride. And so it kind of both outside of the community and inside of it kind of gives you that validation that like you're legit. I mean clearly everybody is legit, but like it to have mainstream be like, okay, we're behind you, we're supporting you. Like even if they're selling their own stuff and they've got their own agenda behind it, they're still feeding money into Pride. Like there's no way around it. You're still giving money to the LGBT community.
I'll tell you what my worry is, and I think this happens whenever a cause in any way sort of becomes the cool thing to be a part of. My fear is that somebody like, let's take Coca-Cola for example, and I want to say I don't
Not
know
a sponsor.
I don't know what their policies are, what their company policies are. But say Coca-Cola, we're going to sponsor Pride, we're going to make all kinds of rainbow merchandise. Then I have to ask the question: do they give trans surgery benefits to their employees? Did they give same-sex domestic partner benefits before marriage equality was a thing? I think my big worry is that sometimes we're in danger of letting people benefit from our work in the community, our work as far as, mainstreaming the cause and making gay rights and queer rights and trans rights a thing that people care about. Then a company can jump on, take advantage of the good publicity that comes with being a part of this event, but not actually give anything to the community.
Right.
I just sort of cynically thought during the last Pride Parade that, because I was, the last one was my third, and I was like, I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't this new, amazing, fresh thing anymore. And I was just thinking to myself, I wonder how many companies are marching in this parade, getting the cred for being part of this movement that's kind of cool to be a part of in some circles, but don't give those benefits to their employees. They're benefiting, basically they're benefiting from our community without giving anything back to us. And I think that's what I was missing earlier, and I was sort of rambling on about corporate sponsorships and diluting the message and that kind of stuff. I wonder how much of that happens and how much of that we're willing to let happen. Like, is that a thing we're okay with doing? Should we hold to account and say, no, we don't want your $10,000 check because you don't treat your employees right? Is that a thing that we should even worry about in these events? Any thoughts on that?
I feel like that totally makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know what all those corporations do when they're not at Pride. Like, I really don't.
And I don't either, and that's HRC has the Corporate Equality Index with lots of big companies who report. I mean, they have to voluntarily respond to a survey, right? And I think there's like 100 companies on the survey, and outside of that, like, who knows? Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, you're totally fine. I know that there's some. I'm not gonna say all of them, but I do know that like Wells Fargo, and there's. I want to say there's like a couple of airlines that they also march and they're in the parade because they have like big plants. I don't know what they're called in Atlanta. Hubs something. Anyway,
Hubs, yeah, I think hub is the word you're looking for. Yeah.
There we go. In Atlanta, and so they're coming out to support not only just the people that are at Pride, but also the people that are working as part of their company. Like my sister worked for Wells Fargo, and she was telling me about how they offer insurance that specifically covers like transitioning and stuff like that, and same gender marriage rights and stuff like that. And so I know at least that company marches and they actually take what they're marching for outside of just Pride. So I hope fingers crossed that
right.
The rest of the corporations that they're working with are also doing that. But I mean, people say a lot of things and then they're doing other stuff, and so
right. I hear that. Well, friends, we are coming up on time here. Did anybody have any last reflections? Anything that we didn't get to that you think is important to talk about before we jump off here?
I think we need more things shaped like penises at Pride. There's a real lack of that, and I think that is an untapped market. And someone should really look into that. Like, think about all the things you could make penis shaped and just chuck at people in the street.
Wait, what about lesbians? You don't want to tell us penis-shaped things at lesbians.
Penises for lesbians. That's my new charity.
Or asexual people. Or asexual people. Come on now.
You should make like a water gun that's a penis that squirts out water to keep you cool during Pride. I think it's great. Just saying. Cause we've been talking about, business opportunities at Pride and corporations. If corporations really want to get involved in the LGBT community, just make shit that looks like a penis. You'll make a shitload of money. Come on, do it.
Well, now that Ari has successfully brought the discourse down to that level.
I did have one thought about a more positive note. Instead of calling it diluting the message, which gives an image of like adding water to something that you can never take the water back out. Well, even if you have a less nuanced message and it's been simplified and it's missing some of the things, you can always add more of the message back in later, and you can always fight more for, you realize that one of these corporations isn't doing right by their employees even when they're supporting Pride, and you can still, address that in your activism, and it's not like too late or whatever. So there's always that kind of, potential out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's easier to throw the door open if you can get your foot into it first. If I can coin a metaphor there, I think that's a great thought, and I actually completely agree with that. Awesome.
It's like in elementary school when you're learning math, and they're like, "Here's math," and you're like, "Yay, I know all the math." And then you get to middle school, and they're like, "Here's more math," and you're like, "Nay, yay, now I know more math." And then you get into high school, and they're like, "Well, some of that wasn't really the whole deal," and you're like, "Okay." And then you get to college, and they're like, "All of that was wrong. Learn it over again." I mean, that's pretty much the activist dilemma here, I guess.
Perfect. Well, that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. Again, want to thank all of our guests. I think this was a great discussion and an important topic, something that I've wanted to talk about for some time, and here we are. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCallie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists, and our panel is going to get to experience an Ari outro live.
Panel, do you ever just wonder, what is this whole life thing all about? You lay up at night, staring at your ceiling, and you go to the window, look outside, see some stars twinkling, and you realize those stars are millions and millions of miles away, and you're seeing the light reflected back through space-time at you, and you're really looking into the past, and you realize just how big and enormous this universe is, and how little your life means in the grand scheme of things, and you realize one day it'll all be over and you'll be dead and your consciousness will be gone, and all of a sudden everything just kind of crashes around you, and you're thinking, oh God, what is the point of life? What is my place here in the universe? How can I make some meaning out of this little tiny sliver of time that never is going to make any difference in this gigantic universe that we live in? Well, I don't really know about any of that, but if you want to talk about gay shit, you can friend me on Facebook, Ari Stillman. Email me, aristillman4@gmail.com. You can listen to me on the Cis Are Getting Out of Hand, and don't listen to the SJW Circle Jerk. And I probably should have put a trigger warning for death anxiety on that. Whoops.
If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. Make a per episode donation to help us out. And if that's not something that's doable, you can always head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review, and that helps us get heard by a lot more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.